Okay, so I live down in the tropics, Trinidad in the Caribbean, and I have access to all kinds of nice tropical hardwoods, right? I have stashes of them hanging around. Cedar, mahogany, some Guyanese woods, purple heart, green heart, all kind of stuff, right? Saman. That rough looking piece of wood would be really beautiful for this project. But what I do have also to this big piece of Spanish cedar, big piece, almost about 2.5 inches thick. I could cut a rectangle out of this and have a one-piece plinth, right? But the one that comes to mind most is a Guyanese wood called Habubali. And Habubali is particularly beautiful, but I've never really gotten it in dimensions that were good for my guitar building. I've had a few pieces that were wide enough to build guitars from. And I went back to this sawmill and I bought as much as I could, but it were just 2x4s. But you can see this is very nice and streaky, medium brown. And what happens to, I may not see it at this point, but it can be very figured, very flamed, three-dimensional figuring, which you're not going to see it right now. These pieces might be a bit straight. Now, I don't really want to do a big one with extra area all around the edges. I kind of like the look of the old Autofon ones, which are quite tight perimeter with the rounded edges. I like the look of that. So I'm going to go with that, right? I would love to get this larger board and have the longer. I'm not in that world yet, right? I do not know that world. So for now, I'm just going to cater to this tight kind of outline. Okay, so I'm going to run this through the planer now. Very light passes just to clean the surface, level it, and show what sort of wood grain we're going to be working with. Okay. Damn, that planer needs some servicing. Okay, so we're looking along the wood grain pattern here. Some kind of heavy striping down here. Up here it's a bit plain, so I flip it over, but this side looks really nice. It's sort of even striping all the way down. All the way down. It's just so perfectly uniform. So I'm just looking below here and making a few measurements regarding the plinth ideas. And I was looking at this. One consideration is the mushrooms. They're these 4 rubber, normally they have a mushroom shape. So these have turned completely hard. There's nothing rubbery about them. And I saw 3 of them and I said, well, geez, where's the third one, right? The third one has actually melted and pressed into the adjustment knob. If you look at it, they generally have a hollow inside here. And this one, the plastic is actually melted into that. I think I'm gonna go mushroomless. I'm gonna suspend the chassis a different way. Look at that, that was all gummed up in there. Ew. I have this beautiful pieces of wood picked out for the plinth. So pretty that I don't even know which piece to use for the front. This is going to be nice and figured wood when it's sanded and lacquered. If I had to do the Autofon style, you can see here almost from the shadow of the sort of tan line that I would have to cut the walls of these very thin in these areas to make these inside curves, right? All here. So I'd have to trim this down to actually a pretty thin wall, which I really don't want to do at all. Maybe that Autofon thing is made of plastic, I don't know. So anyway, what I want to do is I want to keep these fully thick going all the way around. So that basically increases the perimeter of the outside that we're going to end up with, right? It's not a bad thing. The wood we're using is so pretty. The more that you see will be even better, right? Let's cancel that earlier Autofon idea. So having measured the widest parts of this cutout, right, drawn a very simple layout of how these wooden cuts need to be. So what I need to add in, I'm going to have to add into here some corner blocks to reinforce the strength of the corners, this kind of thing. Some new people would print out exact templates and stuff, but my printer isn't working right now. There's no ink in it. But you know, I'm a woodworker. I'm a pretty seasoned woodworker, and I'm actually going to take this plinth apart, and I'll be able to use it as a template. But again, I'm not looking to saw any of those curves. I'm going to have this casting rest just over the inner edge of this. Oh, it's going to look nice. It's going to look nice. And of course, these corners have to get rounded. The top edge and the very corners will get rounded over. Okay, I just did a little double checking of these measurements onto the plinth itself. I just drew onto the board, right, with these pencil lines here, right, where these lines would lay, these inner lines, in relation to the chassis. And we can see that in all corners, those lines would actually peep out and have a little gap, a little corner peeping out. You would see straight through to the bottom, right? So what I need to do to close up that gap, simply two things. I could just glue a little piece on the inside and that gap would disappear. But I did look at it and figured that these dimensions would be pretty much exactly the same as this plinth right now, which is a bit too wide. I find this ledge is too wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut an inch off of each piece, reduce each of these pieces by an inch. And that will shave a ½ inch off of each of these lines in the corner here. And that will make this gap disappear, right? So that's what I'll do. I'll tighten up a little bit from here, taking an inch off each piece. Look at these pieces of lumber I've picked out. The face looks nice, but ooh, look at the top edge. And I was telling you, we can have a nice looking top edge. Whoa, ain't that nice? So this will be going around the perimeter. This one isn't as nice. As well as the faces looking really pretty as well. Look at that. Okay folks, I've been trying hard, but I've been having a really hard time doing this simple plinth simply because these 45 degrees cuts are so hard to do correctly. My chops over here, my wood workshop has been down and inactive for a while, so a lot of my tools are sort of need a servicing and so on. This chop saw here, I just wasn't getting the right 45 degree measurements on this until I revived my digital protractor, right? And then I had tried to set up a sled system on my table saw to cut the angles. You can see the table saw set to 45 degrees. That didn't work either. So I'm just readjusting this very carefully with the digital protractor, and then I could just reshave each edge of these. You could see they were kind of, this is the error. This is a bit of an exaggeration, but this is a problem. The toe is too long, and I'm going to just zip each of these angles until it squares up nicely. Here we can see the error of the cuts, right? We can see that I'm putting right, so I'm putting my square right up on this glass plate, putting the square right up against the side. We get a nice perfect, no gaps anywhere. But here, when I put this up against the beveled cut, you can see a gap, right? You see that gap there? So I need to just readjust this saw to close that gap, and we should be okay then, I hope. Okay, so I've had really terrible luck cutting all the angles and stuff to get this thing done, but I came kind of close today, and I've decided to just pull the trigger and glue up all these corners, right? And we have this whole mess of clamps and vices. So right, so if there's any errors, no problem, I'll deal with it on a kind of cosmetic level, you know. But structurally, I just had to get this thing done today. Okay, so here are the beginnings of the plinth, right? It's not the best work I've ever done. You can see in the glue seams there's going to be something of a gap here and there, but it's not bad once it's structurally stable. So I'm going to go over to the table now and sort of lay it on and see what parts of these corners I can reinforce. These are simply 45-degree joints glued in place, and that's not very strong. I wouldn't do anything with this to stress these joints. They could break apart easy because we have end grain being glued to end grain at that 45-degree angle. It's not strong. There's no way this could exist without internal reinforcements. So I'm going to cut some probably little 2-inch by 2-inch blocks and glue them inside here with screws going in like that. But I have to just check the clearance to see how much room I really have. I know there's one corner where I can't do that all the way. I think this corner near the control, I have to leave space for that control to live in. Okay, so I've taken this over from the regular plinth and it's sitting on these support rods, and this shows you exactly what's going on. Over here I can put some big reinforcement blocks. Same thing here, I can put some big blocks here, right? To drill holes going all the way through for these rods. But in this corner we have this circular control, right? I have to actually cut out or drill, just route out a ledge here, a round kind of cookie cutout here for this to sit in, right? And again, over here, there's nothing below that is going to bother me putting a huge reinforcement block in that corner. And this one will also have a reinforcement block, but it just won't come all the way up to the top here. It'll live about, a little over an inch further down than the others. So I went over and I picked out and cut some 1 5/8 mahogany blocks, and these are going to be fitted to the inside wall. But as I showed before, I'm going to need 3 that are the full height and 1 that's a short stumpy one. So I'm now marking holes that I want to drill because I want to put some drywall screws through them into the wood here as additional reinforcement. As I mentioned before, this 45-degree glued joint doesn't have a lot of strength on its own. It's really going to rely on that block reinforcement for strength. So not only glue, but screws going in is going to be a good strong way for this to live. Just in case, who knows, sometimes it might fall or whatever. You don't want the whole thing cracking apart, right? And you can't fix it. So now on some projects you might put those screws like through the walls here and put dowels and stuff, but we don't want that. We want to see plain wood grain. We don't want any dowels or screw holes, right? Right, so here are our corner blocks, and I'm just going to glue up the far side, the one with the small holes, and press those into place. I'll clamp them and put in screws, right, while the glue dries. Right, so I want this to be the front side simply because the grain is kind of prettiest on the front edges here. And on this corner with the speed control, we're putting the short stumpy block. So I'm going to do that one first so I don't mix them up and mess that up. So this is going to get put along the bottom edge there. Okay, so that's the first one, and something I very much overlooked, but it somehow worked, is that this drill doesn't even fit. It just about got in to put that screw in. I hadn't even thought of that in advance. So those are little things we overlook, folks. Anyway, so that first one is in. Right, so that's all the blocks glued in place. This does not look very elegant, does it? No, it does not. It's very blocky and silly looking, but it'll be strong. And when the turntable is in place, everything will be all right. Okay, now to figure out the right holes and a little bit of routing we need to do on the plinth here, I thought that I would knock apart the original plinth and use the top panel as a a pattern to do my marks and drilling on that, right? But it's actually a little more sturdy on the corners than I thought it would be. So I've taped up some paper on it here, and I'm doing the old classic way of rubbing a big pencil on it, and I'm going to make the outline with all the holes that need to be drilled, right, by doing this, what do you call it, stenciling? Or no, it's not stenciling, it's some other way of rub copy, whatever you call it, right? So I'm going to go all the way around and make a template. Yeah, you could find these things online and print them out life size if you didn't have a plinth to work from. But it's literally easier for me to do this than fight up with a printer to get the sizing correct. I have to get a very close, careful measurement and centering of these post mount holes, right? Because I'm not going to use the original style mushrooms. I'm going to use rubber stoppers in a similar way, the same method, but I'm just using a different, more commonly available rubber foot that I buy for my amplifiers. I don't think I need that mushroom original fitting. Right, so I've used one of these art and technical drawing circle templates just to go over the hole and, you know, from the impression, figure out the actual hole as best I could and mark the centers of it, right? And where I might be cutting out some ledges and stuff, I have to do here. And then drilling these holes for these. Now, the templates have a big hole. The template's hole is about 5/8, or maybe probably 3/4 of an inch. But I'm not doing that because this is meant for the mushroom to sit in there. But I'm not doing that. I'm going to do, well, I'll show you later. Okay, so I have to trim up this paper a bit to fit this plinth. Okay, so I've been sitting the chassis on the template, on the plinth, kind of double checking to see if these feet actually do fall precisely on the hole marks that I've made, and they're not. They're off. Each one will be off by a couple of millimeters. But what I do suspect is that each of these posts, these threaded posts, could be sort of leaning a bit, not absolutely straight and perpendicular to the chassis. Okay, so I've done yet another little extra step here. I've taken out all of the bolts, well, threaded rods that were the uprights here, right? And I've just taken them out. And of course, I did realize when I was turning them out that about 3 of them were definitely leaning. And I just got some little, some bolts here that are the same threading, which I think it's M5. I could be wrong on that one. But I just wanted to put a shorter straight bolt so that I can then lay that down on the plinth for the purpose of checking how well the template holes in pencil are aligned properly. So just having a shorter bolt that's not leaning is going to help me verify that better. Okay, so I've actually neatened up and adjusted this drawing a bit. What I'm going to do is pretty much just raise the blade out. And in this corner here, I'm going to stick to this line because we've got to focus on what needs to be removed from this corner here. Right, so in this corner, we have that big click, click, click control we have to make space for. Okay, so I'm just going to make a couple of holes with the Forstner bit over on the drill press, right? After this is dug out, all the other square ledges should be fine for the chassis to fit into this. That works surprisingly well, actually. It just went straight down and didn't climb out in any way, and it's just a bunch of overlapping holes, right? So I'm not sure if I went deep enough, so I'm going to test fit it now. I'm going to raise away the rest of this and just test fit the whole thing. Well, that looks fine so far. What it's sitting on are the bolt heads, which I can just kind of align properly. And that's not really telling the full story. I need to peep. Let's peep on them. Let's use the camera. If you look up inside, you can see there's that clearance up in that corner. Okay, so I just did a critical step here, which is to take the chassis, lay it on the plinth, right, and line up the edges as best as I could, and compare where these little bolt heads were sitting in comparison to the original plinth's stencil, and we can see they were a little bit off, right? And see the X was from the stencil centering, and we could see the new smaller hole there is where our bolt heads were actually sitting when lined up properly at the perimeters. So the center of this inner hole is my real new center point, right? I'm gonna mark those now. Okay, so I had bought these rubber stops to be acting as the mushrooms instead of actually buying those mushrooms, and these are the height adjuster thumb wheels, right? So they're gonna live like this, but I don't wanna see that black, so I'm gonna countersink these down into the wood a little bit, about, let's see, about 1/8 of an inch or so. Now this rubber bumper, it's a rubber foot, it's 1 inch in diameter, right? So we want to go down 1 inch diameter, 1/8 of an inch, right? And then we'll continue the hole, I'd say 3/8 of an inch all the way down, right? And that will hold the original threaded rod. Now those threaded rods are redundantly too long for what I'm doing here, but they're original rods, so I'll just keep them there, right? So to do a 2-step hole, we start off as one narrow pilot hole, and then we'll do the upper wide one first and do the second deeper hole after. If we started with the deeper hole, we would have a 3/8 inch hole here, and then we would lose our centering. So we start the wider hole while we still have our centering from the narrow bit. Okay, I believe we don't need our template anymore, and I'm just going to tear it away so that it doesn't get in the way of. Okay, now drill presses have depth control settings, and in this case here, it's set so that this Forstner bit would go down, hit this wooden surface, and beyond that wooden level, beyond this surface, it will go further 1/8 of an inch down, right? So by having that adjustment set here, I can easily go around and drill all the holes without worrying that I am pushing it too deep or too shallow, right? They're all going to be set to this depth. But the fact is they're going to be all set by this depth stop to a certain level, and they're going to be level all the way around. Okay, so I've pressed this rubber foot into place, and I can see it's not really deep enough. We should go deeper than that. We want to almost hide that black, okay? So the 1/8, I think I said 1/8, I really should have gone in a 1/4 inch, really, right? So let's reset the depth stop and do that second round of drilling and go down a 1/4 inch deep. Okay, that's tapped in at the deeper depth, and I think that looks really great. Just a little bit of a rubber line. Just glancing it from the side, you can even see the black. So I think that's a good height, right? And I've done that already all the way around. So these are turned out to be decent mushroom replacements. Right, so on the underside now, you still see how much more neatening I have to do this. This piece was painted black at some point. Right, so I just need to pick out some spots where I can then drill a little hole and do a similar method to locate the actual, actual feet, right? So I'm not sure, maybe I should put it right there in the joint. That might be a nice spacing. I think putting it in the center of these inner cleats might be too far to the center. I'm not sure. Let's get back to the top, where I have to continue these holes at the 3/8 thickness, which should be fine. And that's going to go almost all the way through. Okay, and I think that's it for drilling. So these holes, which are now centered on the larger hole, will hold the original height bolts. Okay, people, we're in fine shape here. It's shaping up. Okay, so I've laid it back in the plinth. All the little heads, those bolts are sitting exactly as they should. Just sitting in that 3/8 hole, right? Same here. But of course, these bolts are not staying. It's sitting flush on the plinth all the way around, and nothing's touching on the inside that's not supposed to. and measuring the distance along here and along here, that's exactly even, and the distance on the front and back edges is exactly even, right? So let's actually flip it over and have another peep inside and make sure nothing is bumping into anything that it shouldn't. Okay, we're doing really well here. All the little height bolts are fitting exactly into their respective holes. This was the area of concern that I did a little bit of drilling out to accommodate that switch and that belt there, so nothing is in conflict. This whole area, nothing is to worry about, and the electronics is okay over here. The AC wires will attach here, and this requires no further work. I have no further concerns here. Right, so we're good to go. Our rough structure here is perfectly fine. My next thing is to mark a rounding off of these corners, and I'll have to tackle that with the bandsaw, then the belt sander, and regular sanding, and then I'll probably route these top corners as well. Okay, so having settled the chassis in the top, I just looked around the workshop for any of these round things that I can draw a radius on the corners. This worn grinding, this had just about the exact radius as the chassis, so I just held it up to the edge and drew a line that I'm going to cut along with on the bandsaw, and I've drawn this line at all corners and underneath as well to keep as a guide, right? So sawing is up next. We're now finally finished with this. This can now be retired permanently. As it is full of termites, destroyed wood, I'm going to throw it away. So here we are. I've done the bandsawing, no sanding yet, and I'm just not in a rush to do that because now I have to shift gears to making a new arm board, right? I could use this with a little bit of repainting or whatever, but let's take the chance to make a whole new arm board on this side from the same wood as this, and let's pick just the prettiest piece that we can get our hands on of this type of wood. There's some serious grain figuring going on in this piece right here. Okay, now this piece is kind of useless because it's got a lot of cracks in it, right? I can't use a piece, I can't cut a thin piece of wood from here, but I can cut this arm board size piece from this really beautifully figured wood here. So that's going to be the next thing. I'm not going to cut up the whole board. I'm just going to take a slice out of this area here. It's just about that thick. This is to show how tight things can get. There's a knot right here, and the knot comes through the wood. Yeah, okay, yeah, you can see it now. The knot comes in here and out here. So this piece, we could just about fit this piece, this arm board right here, right? And we'll get a nice figured section. And at the other end, here's where the cracks come up to, right? So just where the cracks end is where this arm board starts. So we just squeezing the dimensions of this arm board into this section here. How much rounding am I putting on this upper edge, right? It's hard to decide because this, when I look online at all the different projects like this, all have different styles. There's different amount of roundness here. There's different amounts of roundness on this edge. Those little details really affect the look, right? I have quite an array of options here. I have from 1/8 round over, let's hold it against the white, very, very small radius, all the way up to big ones, like a 1/2 inch, right, which is very round. That's round like a guitar cabinet, you know. So I'm going to start off a bit small. I think I'm going to do a 1/4 inch and see how that looks. I think that's the size I see on most of them, and it just suits the look of the table. Here's a simple setup with the belt sander. It's clamped down 90 degrees to this piece of table, also just clamped in place, nothing too sturdy really, but it'll just about hold this, and that height is enough to handle the whole height of the plinth. All right, here we are a little closer to the target. I've belt sanded the edges here slightly just to remove the glue and to make sure these are nice and level for the router to move along. And we've got a nice curve here. I'm just rubbing my hands on it. It feels perfectly smooth. Remember, the human hands are so sensitive in woodwork. It's very useful to just feel what you're doing to help pick up on any flaws. But it feels good. Of course, I have to do finish sanding, but the initial belt sanding seems good, right? Let's move on to the routing. Going through this very quickly today. So we clamped that down and mounted the 1/4 inch round over bit very securely and adjusted it just so the edge is level with the base plate. Okay, so now we have that rounded top edge, and of course it needs to be sanded. There's a little bit of ridges where the intentionally it's a little bit of a ridge to allow for the amount of sanding that's going to take place, right? So let's put the chassis on this and see how it looks. I'm kind of excited to see that. Even at this point, it should look nice. Here we go. That looks nice. I guess I could leave it like that. It looks good. I don't think I needed any more round than that. I think the look is perfect. The 1/4 inch. Oh, that's so perfect. I'm leaving it just the way it is. No further rounding. So now I have to shift to sanding and we have to get started on that arm board. Sorry, it's just me here doing this by myself, and I'm not always able to film what I'm doing. But anyway, I drew a line along the board as I had mentioned before and band sawed it out, right? It's as simple as that. Now that's not the straightest of cuts, so this now has to pass through the planer. Right, so that's done. Let me tell you, this thing has some beautiful wood grain. I don't know if you're going to catch it until it's been varnished, but those ripples, those kind of diagonal ripples in the grain that you see are a hint of what I'm talking about, right? So this now is clear enough. You could lay this piece over the other. I just fit the outline for this, right? Okay, so I have roughly traced with pencil this onto this. Roughly, it's not an exact thing because I'm just going to band saw along this rough line, and I'm going to be with the drill press drilling out within this here, right? Okay, so I've looked at this and I've determined that this part of the board has prettier wood grain than this part. So I've redone the whole hair so that this part would be the most visible to someone looking at the turntable, and that's the prettiest piece of wood. So that's the thing with woodworking, you know, you have show pieces and hidden pieces. Anytime you're working on a piece of wood, whether you're making a dresser or cupboard or guitar, whatever, when you process your lumber, you look at it to see, well, which piece is the prettiest that I want people to see, and which part of it is boring and I'm going to hide it on the inside, right? You always do that in woodworking all the time. Right, so here we are. Let's look at this in strong light. There's some strong sunlight right here. You see what I'm starting to talk about? You see the reflectiveness? The reflectiveness is going to show up when this is lacquered. Right? That's the real time for this to show up. Right, so we're going to make an exact copy of this onto this. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use the screw holes. This has 4 screw holes around the arm mounting plate area, and these which fasten to the chassis. So once I line these up how I want to, double stick tape them together, I can drill through these holes into the bottom board, permanently transferring the holes, right? But then after that, I could actually put screws in from one to the other, holding them together with that double stick tape and stuff. And I can run the router along them and exactly copy one outline onto the next. Okay, so I've put some double stick tape between the boards. Now, so this is a little wider than the black part, but these two, I align them exactly correct, right? So the router will be going along this edge. This is already lined up perfectly. Okay, over at the drill press, I've drilled through here. I've drilled not all the way, but I've just put a brad point bit a little bit of the way in. So there's a nice centered, tiny start of a hole here. And I took my big 1-inch Forstner bit and just went in a bunch of times to clear out most of the wood in there. So this is ready for now the router part of it. Okay, set up in the middle of the guitar workbench area is a mini router table setup, which I usually use for cutting guitar pick guards. And the method is the same. You have a template and you would attach a plastic raw material and cut it on this setup here. And here we have it. We've been riding along the edges and then now perfectly flush. This hole is not very neat, but anyway. Well, that's not flush. Right, so now we have our 2 identical shapes with the screw holes in all the right places, right? And the only thing you have to do now, I'm going to put a decorative edge here. I guess I'll do like a 1/8 inch round over, not as round as the plinth itself. And on the inside here, I have to put an angle. And along this edge my thumb is on, which you can see here, right? That angle has to be copied to here, and that's pretty easy. We could set up machinery for that, but really, that could be a job as simple as the old hand plane, right? Using my digital protractor here, I'm seeing this is about a 36 cut, right? So as I say, there's many different ways to do that cut. It could be done on the table saw, the jointer, the router. Could just be done by hand. Right, so I had that upright in the vise, and I plane that edge, right, to 60 degrees, just measuring it back and forth, of course. But of course, the real test is to come over here to the chassis, and we see we got it just right. Just perfect, right? I got it, yeah. Okay, right, so that's going in there. And my observation right now, couple things. This edge sticks out a little more than the chassis. So this needs to be rounded off a little bit more. I'm gonna have to do this on the belt sander, okay? Bigger problem over here is where I've ignored earlier markings about the cutout, and I'm gonna have to cut away all this wood underneath here because I have some space. The armboard electronics needs to go down into there a certain distance, so I'll be taking this off and doing some sort of excavation going further down. Again, that's markings in the template earlier that I ignored. Okay, so having ignored the cutaway in this top right corner earlier, let's focus on it now, right? So we have to remove a certain distance down in the area below this arm board, right? This section here, right? So looking at it closely, we need to drill down here. But how much are we going to drill down? We need to drill down a certain depth to accommodate this black section, right? And some RCA jacks sticking out to the left side of it, right? So we have two thicknesses to take into consideration. This chassis itself is about 3/8 of an inch, and this panel is about, how much is that? Is about 1/2 inch, right? So we need to, we got this is measuring just under an inch here. So this is measuring just under an inch there, and this measures just under 2 inches, right? I need to go drill downward and to this left just about an inch, right? It's really similar to what I did in this opposite corner here. I've set up my drill press so it will go down about 1 1/8 inches from this top edge. So all the drill strokes I do will end up at the same bottom level. I've removed the screws that were here. Okay, so the chassis is in the right place on the plinth, and I've drilled out a few holes here. They're not the neatest looking things in the world, but I might go over it with the router later to clean it all up, right? And now I can put this back on, and now I can put the arm on for the first time. Yeah, perfect, right? I'm not sure how much adjusting I need to do to the base plate and stuff, right? I'm not familiar with this arm yet. But what I do have to figure out, I know that this has a setup to slide back and forth. So I'm just going to loosen this. I'm going to slide this back and forth to make sure it can go in all of its possible positions, right? If not, I will drill and make a little more room on the inside. Okay, so this now seems to be able to slide back and forth in there. No problem. In the correct position. Okay, so this whole thing has been sanded to 320 grit through several grades, 80, 150, 220, 320. Doesn't really make sense to sand any finer than that. You won't really see the benefits, but 320 is pretty great, especially for figured woods. So I've done all the slight rounding of the edges and top and below, and of course that was done with the router and then carefully gone over again with hand sanding. And I'm ready to move on to lacquering, but let me share with you my big concern about this next step. So I build guitars, right, and amplifiers. A lot of amplifiers around, stacks of amplifiers. And all of these guitars you see here that I've built are finished with nitrocellulose lacquer, which is the old-time lacquer. It's the preferred thing for guitars. And it's nice because it's a one-step thing. And I just know how to use it. I know how much sealer to spray, how many coats of lacquer to spray before I have to stop and then let it cure, etc., etc., etc. The problem with it, nitrocellulose, is that, you know, it's limited availability. It may not be around in the future. And it's a very smelly, toxic lacquer to spray. I have to wear a lot of protective gear. I've been keen to move over to water-based finishes, right? Which are the modern thing. And I've seen lots of websites and stuff showing that a properly done water-based polyurethane can be just as shiny and nice as nitrocellulose. I mean, look at this. Come on, hard to beat, right? So I want to take my first steps into water-based polyurethane. I've been wiping some onto this sample piece here. This is the same wood. And of course you could see this surface is a bit blotchy because I haven't been spraying it. I've just been rubbing it on with some bits of foam brush, right? And basically I want to use the opportunity of this plinth to spray the water-based polyurethane on it because it's the thing that I should be using in future. This is really a very regular home-based product, right? Normally you just put this on your floor or a table or whatever shelf you're making. This is normal hardware store stuff, but if it's sprayed right and thick enough and wet sanded and buffed properly, it's supposed to be as good as those nitrocellulose finishes. I don't know if that's really true. But anyway, I'm going to use this plinth project as a trial to see if I could get this product as nice and shiny as those guitars. And of course, if it's successful, I'll try this on guitars in the future. Okay, so we start with the bottom on the inside. So here it is upside down, and I have it on this little spinning Lazy Susan. So I'll do the bottom and the inside for a while, and then I'll flip it over and focus on the outside and the top at that point. Okay, so I've sprayed the first set of sealer coats here on the inside and outside and underneath. And I didn't go too heavy. I certainly didn't spray so much that it would drip or anything, right? But I didn't want to do too much. Let me show you why. This here, you see the reflections here? Now the wood starts to look a little bumpy, is because this is the problem with moving from nitrocellulose over to the water-based finishes. Water-based finish, the water content actually causes the grain, it soaks into the wood a bit and causes the grain to swell a little bit, right? Which you could kind of see here, right? Now that does not happen with the nitrocellulose, and it's also the reason I said earlier, don't worry to sand past 320 grit, because any extra effort beyond that is wasted because the water is going to make it swell anyway. Okay, so what I have to do now, I'm going to flip this over and do the top, but this being the first coat, I'm just going to let it dry for a day or two, and I'm going to very lightly sand it again to remove any of the swelling of the wood grain, right? I'll kind of re-flatten the surface, and it's only after we have sealed that's what the whole purpose of sealing the surface is. After we've dealt with that swelling, we move on to heavy coats that actually build the thickness on the gloss, and those heavier coats won't be affecting the wood, right? They'll just be building up thicker and thicker. Okay, so now I just can't resist having a little sneak peek at the plinth. We only have the first sealer coat on. We have many layers to go, but what we see here is the final color, and you can see some very lovely wood grain. It's quite subtle, but besides the streaks, there's some other nice figuring. New armboard, right? So that's lovely. I mean, it looks nice with the black too, but this wood grain is particularly nice as well, right? Very three-dimensional. So there we are. Okay, the following morning, I have to say I'm very impressed with this finish. I just did 2 spray sessions with it yesterday, an hour apart. Let it dry overnight, and the coat built up thick enough that I've been able to do a full level sanding this morning with 320 grit again, just to remove the gloss and any of the sort of puckering up of the wood grain below, and do an absolutely flat level sanding with no problems gumming up the sandpaper or anything, which is great. If this does turn out to produce a good gloss finish, it's going to make a very nice guitar finish, this water-based polyurethane, because I'm shocked at how much level built up just from one day, two spray sessions, right? Normally with nitro, it's so thin, it soaks into the wood when you first spray it, and then it continues to dry so thin that you can't really level sand until you've done maybe a half dozen spray sessions, right? This has done it in one morning, so very good so far. This has been drying and curing for about 5 days now, right? And what I did was I spent over the course of a week, so almost every other day, I sprayed heavy coats. What I would do was I'd do like 2 sessions each day. Let's say before lunch, I'd spray 2 heavy coats on this, let it dry for an hour. After lunch, I would come back, spray 2 more heavy coats, let that dry. And then like 2 days later, I would dry sand any little imperfections that I saw anywhere, any little runs or any little thing, and then give it a general flat sanding on all of these surfaces, right? And I did that every other day. Right now we've had about 8 of those heavy spray sessions, okay, with flat sanding in between. So how it is now, it's generally flat all the way over, but there are some little imperfections, some little bit of wobbliness to the surface. You could see that here. Here you can see evidence this kind of thing happens where you sand through one bumpy layer and then you spray another layer over the top, but you can see the previous layer in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to wet sand this. I'm going to go to 800 grit, then move to 1200 and 1500, and then I'm going to attempt buffing it the same way I do my guitars, right? I hope this goes well because I've never actually wet sanded and buffed water-based polyurethane. If it doesn't work out, if it sucks, I will revert to spraying it one coat, final coat of satin finish polyurethane, and I'll be done. That's the backup plan, but I will put in a valiant effort. Okay, so what we do is we put a little soap and water in here. We'll soak the paper, little squares of paper. Take a flat block and rub all the major flat surfaces until they're level. And then when the paper kind of dulls down a little bit and loses its strength, we just go along and do the round edges by hand, right? And then you move through the grits, one after the other. When you're done with the final, start buffing and see if there are any scratches still present on the surface when you buff. And if you do see too many scratches on the surface, you will return to the wet sanding and keep wet sanding until your buffer is showing up a smooth surface. And then of course you keep going with that until it starts to shine and you get full gloss. Okay, well, so for those who are interested in this kind of thing, this is going really well. The 800 really bit into the surface, and even where they had little imperfections, the 800 blazed through it really quickly. And where it was flat, it just instantly turned to a flat looking finish, right, without the shiny spots. I mean, it works so well, it works almost too well, like worryingly well. Like I was hoping I didn't sand through it, right? So in comparison to nitrocellulose, there was a little bit more of a buildup on the paper from the dust being sanded off, this white dust. It clogs up the paper to a certain amount. It was a little more cloggy than nitrocellulose, but I was able to move the clogs off pretty easy. So now that the paper's dulled down a little bit, I'm gonna freehand tackle the sort of round edges here. You want to do that when the paper is a bit duller. When the paper is fresh, you have more likely of it cutting through, right? So I got to go on and rub that, get that flat finish on all edges, and then I'm going to move on to the next grade, the 1200 and then the 2000. But so far, I'm having a good time with this waterborne. It's responding very well to the wet sanding so far. Right, so here's a couple of minutes buffing on medium grit, buffing compound, and the results are pretty great. I haven't even moved on to the fine grit yet, and this is about as glossy as I can expect anything to be. Right, so we'll move on to the main body. Okay, so here we are after about a half hour of buffing and so on. I put the flash on for this. You can see how glossy and shiny all these parts are now. Right, so this has worked very well. I see a few little errors here and there that I'm going to take into consideration if I want to use this stuff for guitars. I can see some little micro bubbles here and there that are not bothering me in the context of this plinth, but they would bother me on a guitar. And that's something that comes from spraying techniques, right? So I think I have to spray thinner coats here and there. But this is super glossy, look at that. Now I've used one of my buffing wheels, which is loaded with a medium grit, right? And tomorrow I'm gonna let it settle overnight, and maybe rest the surface a bit. And tomorrow I'm gonna hit it the fine super polish, right? So this may get even glossier, but you know, it's not really so necessary, but it is just part of the steps. Yes, so look at that nice wood grain. It's actually not as figured here as I thought it would be, you know, when I was first selecting the wood. This piece here is particularly well figured, and this isn't quite as figured, but of course these stripes and stuff are really beautiful. Look at that. Wow. One side is, this piece here is a little more figured. This is closer to the armboard. But anyway, that's just cosmetics, right? We've got a real nice thing going here. A lot of work, as you see, but you know, that's where the results come from. Well, I'm almost done here, but still getting a bit of a mess on the edges where the buffing wheel kind of grabs on the edges sometimes and leaves more wax compound than it does leave a gloss. So I'm getting gloss on this, but I don't know that I'm getting glass. I'm not really getting this to shine as much as a nitrocellulose finish would, right? Is it my wet sanding? Is it the polyurethane lacquer itself? Not sure. Well, I'll keep at it and let's see how it goes. But so far it's certainly good enough for a turntable plinth, but let's keep going and see how it goes. Okay, I think I'm done here. As I said before, not quite up to guitar finish standards, but pretty great for a turntable plinth standards, right? Yeah, one of the things is that when I'm buffing it, I could still see real tiny scratches in the finish left over from wet sanding. And normally you would buff your way through that. You would say, okay, well, I could buff out those fine scratches without going back to the fine wet sanding. But you see, again, I don't know this finish as well as I know nitrocellulose. So I didn't know, do I go back to the wet sanding or do I continue to buff and get the problems out? So it's one of those little sitting on the fence kind of things while working. So anyway, this is good. And this weekend, I swore to myself I was going to finish this project this weekend. I hope I can. And tomorrow I'm going to assemble this.